starts to scream. We are live. Okay, hello everybody. I hope you can hear us well. Welcome everyone. My name is Laís and Derek. I'm the very proud and happy author of Hacking Communities, a baby that has taken 2 long years to be born. And I'm very, very glad to be here with Derek Andersen, who I would say is one of the responsible and guilty ones for this book being born. Thank you for being here, Derek.
Thanks for having me.
This is amazing. And well, we'll take some 2 minutes, just wait for some more people to walk in because, people are usually late. And we have people from all over the world, from San Francisco, 8 a.m., where Derek is, to Asia. So let's give them a couple of minutes. And meanwhile, can I have a quick check in the chat if you can hear me? And if you can hear me well, if my voice is breaking. You can also have a bingo of the most commonly said words. Okay, hey, hello, Klaus. Guess who's here? Derek.
Who's here?
Klaus. Our good old Klaus.
How is Klaus doing?
I hope he's doing great. By the way, I'll record this session. Oh my God, we also have a new, hey, old fellow. Fur is also here. Remember this guy?
Sure. Of course.
I'm so happy. It's like a family in this
All
life.
your friends all over the world.
Yeah. Make friends, not contacts, right?
That's correct.
So we're about to get started. Thank you all very much for being here. I will confess that I'm a little bit nervous because it's my first time doing this live thing during this COVID-19 crisis, because unlike everybody else, I was not hosting lives. I was head down writing a book, which is finally out. So now I'm going to be one of you. And I have here Derek Andersen, and I'm so grateful to have him as a symbolic beginning, as a kickoff to this book. So for those of you who do not know, if it was not for Derek, Hacking Communities would not be out there. And I hope that's a good thing that it is. I hope you guys enjoy the book. And Derek has been one of the first people I met in the world who called community building, and who taught me that it's not about the frameworks, but about the values and about the relationships you build. As Derek would say, it's all about the cadence. And there's a lot in it that come from his learnings. So with no further ado, Derek started Startup Grind from 1 to 5 to 20 to 600 chapters all over the world. I was part of it. And more recently started Bevy, which fastly grew, raised $21 million US, acquired CMX, the largest community platform, largest platform, I'd say, for online community managers, builders, leaders, etc. And he's just an authentic community builder, the best I could find in the world, and I'm bringing him to you right now. Thank you for being here, Derek.
Thanks for sharing. Thanks for saying all that. And I have to thank you because, if it weren't for you, I may not have realized how big Startup Grind could be. I remember very specifically one time when we were brainstorming when you were on my team, and I think we were probably in about 75 cities or something like that. And you said, how are we going to get into 500 cities? And I remember sort of audibly laughing, that's not possible. But then as the meeting went on, I just kind of sat there and well, what if it were possible? And that's what we figured out how to do. And I think much to the annoyance of the rest of the team, or, concern, because they realized they were going to have to do, a lot of that work. But, that was sort of what we charged at after that. And, it took us a few years, but eventually we figured out how to do it. So thank you.
So thank you for sharing that. And out of this, I'd like to learn a little bit about your journey. I know a little bit about it, but I won't give any spoilers. So I heard that Bevy somehow got started from you building this community at Startup Grind and finding in your directors your first users. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, yes, absolutely. We built the product to solve Startup Grind's problem. We really didn't anticipate, certainly I didn't anticipate that we would become a tool for enterprises to manage their communities. I think we early on when we started to build it, we were like, we knew there wasn't anything like it because I had tried to buy a tool first and I had looked at everything and there wasn't anything really close. So I think we thought, there's probably some other startup grind types of companies that should use it, like, Startup Weekend, or I don't know, Angel Hack or something like that. But I don't think we ever, certainly I didn't anticipate that an Atlassian or a Google or a Salesforce would buy our product. I didn't, that really didn't occur to me until much later after the product was done. And then, so.
Can you tell me a little bit more about this journey? Because I know that you built that solution because Startup One was pretty much based in recurring interactions, right? For you to build a community, you said that thing about cadence, and you created this very simple model to allow it to be repeatable. It could be, in the case of Startup Grind, it was on a monthly basis, but it could be in any other frequency, right? And then you created this platform to make that happen in a simple way. And how did you find others would want that? And how much adaptation was required? And if you can tell, for those who do not know, how does it work? What is Bevy exactly?
Bevy helps you scale a virtual or in-person community. It's all white labeled. It's, you can have single sign-on. You can have all the sort of enterprise type of branding, and then you own all the data. One thing that frustrated us early on was sending all of our users to Eventbrite, which I think we did for this event, which is fine. But it's good for like if you're doing one-off events, but if you're doing dozens or hundreds of events, like driving your traffic somewhere else to, you're building essentially Eventbrite's business, that didn't really make sense to us. And so, it turned out that other people had the same problem. We didn't have a business model that really facilitated hiring a lot of people. And that's usually, people who have big communities like Google and Salesforce. They usually would just like hire, when they got bigger, they would hire more people, but we couldn't do that. So we had to automate it as much as possible and make it as easy as possible for organizers. And so, we built the first version of the tool, like starting in 2012. We launched version 1 in 2013. We used that for 2 years. So we built it on top of other things, and it wasn't scalable. And so when we started working on it in the fall of 2014, we knew exactly what we wanted. But we knew we had to build it from the ground up. It was just going to be a lot of work. And so that's what we started doing. And, we launched, it took us a full year. We launched the next year. And then by the end of that year, I had my first enterprise customers using it. And, we realized at that point when Atlassian, was willing to pay $100,000 a year for it as one of our first customers, they're like, wow, we must have something really special here. We should spend more time on it.
And the way you built it and the way you got to your first 100 customers, I would say, was also very much based on your community principles, wasn't it? Because Atlassian was an relatively old relationship as far as I remember. So it's not that you went cold emailing them. So who are your first 100 customers, and what role did community building play in getting to those?
Well, our very first customer is Aging 2.0, which is a community for people that are aging and going through that process. And it's a wonderful community. They're still work closely with them. CMX, who as you mentioned, we acquired later. They were one of our first customers. MuleSoft, which was acquired by Salesforce, but this was before that. They were one of our first customers. Docker, Silicon Slopes in Utah, just, a bunch of really great communities, some big, some small. And that was sort of enough to get things going. And then Salesforce was one of our first 20 customers. So, before we had raised a lot of money, they jumped in. And again, these things weren't, it's not really normal for Salesforce to be one of your first 20 customers and to give you a ton of money. And so I think that's what fueled the early, even though we didn't see how big it could actually be, those things were so unnatural that it fueled growth for us. It fueled investor dollars coming in. It brought in talent. It was like, wow, you have Salesforce, you're so small. How do you have Salesforce? And it was like, when we explained that, and it really was like the product was just solved the problem so well, like, and that those people were willing to take a risk on it and use it.
Yeah. And going again on this idea of like making friends, not contacts. That's one of the core values of Startup Grind. And it's my favorite, which is why I keep repeating it. Like, give more than take, it's amazing, but make friends is just like build relationships. And by meeting you and the fact that we are talking today means that I find you a person who actually builds authentic ties and relationships. And we may not talk on a weekly basis or on a monthly basis because we are generally busy, that kind of people. But whenever we do, it feels like we build an authentic relationship. And it's the same with Per, who's here watching us, and Klaus, and everyone from Startup Grind. And I feel when I was part of Startup Grind of your team, I remember that we were often hanging out with the Salesforce people, with the Atlassian people. They were supporting us as Startup Grind. And sure, they had seen your good work, and then you came with a kick-ass product. So what advice would you give, of course, taken as a fundamental step that you build a great product? How would you advise a business to grow from scratch in building a community of customers instead of just building a sales team? So how would you go about that?
Bevy's Startup Grind should have never happened, and then Bevy should have never happened. All the things that I've worked on that have been successful are things that just happen very naturally. I really believe deeply in the sort of power of positive thinking, of like, you go where you want your life to go, that you can't control. Certainly there's so much we can't control. And I really don't worry about those things at all. But I just believe really deeply that if you sort of point your mind and your action towards goals, that they will happen. And we always wanted to build a big technology company. Joel and I always talked about this, even while we built Startup Grind, which is not a technology company, it's a community. It stayed in the back of our minds. And so when we built Bevy, although we genuinely, if it only worked for Startup Grind, it was worth it. And we made that decision early on. But like, I think in the back of our minds, we said, you know what, like, hopefully this leads to building a product company. Like, we're product people. That would be incredible. And I think just continuing to think about that and looking for opportunities, eventually sort of led us down that path. And I think Bevy's on a really special trajectory. We have about, and frankly, Startup Grind is too. I mean, Startup Grind, it's taken so many twists and turns, but we've never had a team at Startup Grind like the team we have now. We have 20 people there, just amazing people, scaling out different processes, going virtual this year. The impact that we had was so much larger this year than any year we've ever had. Changed our business model to more digital than in person. But I think just having that sort of in the back of our minds, saying like, we want to build this kind of business. Like, we sort of
let go.
Things just kind of got us in that, got us there.
And I think that a lot of what I shared with people was broadly about the principles of community building, which come back to the values of making friends, etc. I want to talk about that. But first, it's also about, I believe that especially when loneliness is somehow an epidemic, it's a responsibility that we build better communities. not only I find that you have built a great community with startup grind, so you got that at your core, and then Bevy, great product that translates everything and facilitates the path to other people. Basically, I see Bevy as like a framework that helps people build great communities, and those principles are embedded in it, in that platform. So, seeing businesses starting communities, what do you think makes it challenging for a business to start a community? In a nutshell, many people think it's contradicting or think of community as something only as like social work. So how do you see companies building communities, and what kind of businesses maybe could not build a community, if any?
Yeah, I mean, when you're starting a company, you're sort of, everything's on fire. So you're putting out the most important fires all the time, the biggest fires, the most dangerous fires. Sometimes they're not the biggest, but they're just, they're getting close to something that cannot burn. And so, community or building deep customer relationships, it's not always natural to think that, oh, like once I get a customer, like I've got to make sure that like they feel really a part of this product. Some people feel it intrinsically that like I need to make sure my customers are a meaningful part of my product after they buy. It's more important after they buy than before they buy. Like they've got to become successful. What I've learned running a subscription SaaS business is that we've had moments where we've had incredible retention, like crazy retention, and we've had moments where we've churned a bunch of people. You cannot build a big subscription business churning customers. You can't. It's like trying to walk through the mud when your customers start leaving. Even though you have sales coming in, like they're going out the back door, it feels terrible. And so, building a community is what drives retention. It's what drives expansion. It's what drives activation in your product. But it's very easy to say like, oh, I have so many other things I have to do. I don't have time to do that. But it's a key indicator of future success and of growth is if you're able to drive, belonging, and you're able to drive engagement from your existing customers so that they expand and they grow inside your business and have success. So there's lots of reasons not to build a community. But the science around it and the ROI, Salesforce, sees people, 2x reduction in churn and sees them be 3x the average, value of people that aren't in the community. I mean, there's lots of good business reasons for it, but it's easy to push it off and do something else.
Yeah. And if you look at a business now, and I see a lot of companies saying, oh, community management positions and hiring for community managers. And I judge sometimes that what they have is only like a customer's database and people commenting on social media, and that's called community management. So how do you actually define if it's a customer's database only or a community, what you're building? So what are the evidences?
Well, I mean, look, if you have passionate customers, like that's the beginning of a community. But there's different types of activations. There's different types of experiences that you can have to engage and enrich your community's lives. And that could be around events. That could be around, in-person or virtual. That could be around discussions or message boards or forums. Could be in Slack, could be on Facebook. As I've been reading some of your book, and as I've been thinking about this talk, I was just thinking like, at what point does a customer become a community, and or a set of customers start to become a community? And I don't think it has to be a lot. It can be really deep and meaningful and but it can also be very simple. And if you're a startup or you're just getting going, if you just have 5 or 10 or 20 people that really feel passionate about what you're doing, and you're getting really positive feedback around how you're engaging with them or bringing them together, that can be considered a community. So, but anybody that has passionate customers, and you asked earlier, what types of businesses can't build community? I don't have a great answer for that. I know that like oil and gas industry is probably a hard place to build community. I've never talked to anyone in that industry. There's some big companies there.
Actually, I have a fun thought here. I never shared that, and I actually excluded this from my book. But I have a matrix about what makes you need a community. And funnily enough, oil and gas is exactly in the corner of the matrix where you can't build a community. Because
is that right?
It is. I can share that matrix with everyone in this call now. I was too afraid of showing it to the world because that's too experimental. But it's funny that what you're saying, it's exactly my finding from doing that matrix. And the variables, just to share the variables with you, are competitiveness and massiveness. How massive is that industry and how competitive it is? And when it's very low competition and mass, because oil and gas is that's very low relevance for community. So that's just a funny finding. Please continue what you were saying.
Yeah, no, that's a great thought of like that you put like where you put them in the matrix. When products have feature function parity, when they're exactly the same with other things. So think about like you might have a unique idea. You might like it's not going to be unique if it's a good idea. If it's working, someone's going to copy it. So when all of the products are even, or maybe you're behind another company and like you're trying to catch them, when it's all the same, what is the thing that gets a customer to stay with you and not go to somebody else? And you probably in your brain, you might think like, oh, it's price. I have to be the cheapest. That's not true. Because you can provide a level of service that the other company can't provide, or you can, you might have a brand, or you might have security, or there's all sorts of things you can do that you can't really see. But the thing that we see is the best companies in the world, they build a community as a moat. And, it creates a competitive differentiator that, that I think community building is like the new branding. Like, you feel a part of something emotionally, or somebody said to me, CEOs are able to authentically share the values of a company through their community building. That was really an interesting way to look at it. Like, again, as companies get bigger and they get, more lifeless, and it's hard to see the soul and the values of what is really at something. Like, I'm not like public companies. I mean, like a great way to share the values of that company and what it's all about is by building a community around its customers.
I love that idea. That thought you just shared about, a community building is just the new branding. I think branding is an element, a very strong element of it, and it falls into identity, right? In the idea. And another experimental, how can I say, concept framework I brought in, and this one I did include in the book, but I definitely want feedback. But it sort of matches what you said in many ways, because I say, you have a community when there is an identity, which has a lot to do with branding. Like, I feel represented by you and I feel like representing you, so I speak on your behalf. The other is connectedness, as in what you said about C2C, people being together, and either it's an event or forum or whatever it is. And the third is implicit in everything you said, is organic growth. Not necessarily organic, just growth. It grows because it grows from people feeling represented by you and representing you, and it grows from everyone being connected. So there's a network effect, which is more like an exponentiality to it. So I just wanted to share, but there are some questions to you. 2 questions, and I know that you have only 5 minutes left, so I'll just read both. What do you think? And then you can crunch them.
Yeah, sure.
So we have a question from Per, who you know really well. So he's asking for any company that wants to start a community on, for example, Bevy, what's the early phase do's and don'ts? Maybe let's go with that first, and then I'll ask the second.
Well, I think you need to have a singular purpose to why you're doing it. So if you're going to, I mentioned a few things: acquisition, expansion, or retention. You kind of need to just pick something and say, like, we really want to solve this problem, or we want to create a positive outcome in this area. So I think that's one thing that people can make a lot of mistakes on. The other thing is, just going all in. I think people, understandably, they get nervous about, what I had somebody recently at a really big company, really big startup, not a public company, but a really big startup. And they said to me, like, how do you let your customers take hold of your brand? Like, how do you, like, basically sleep at night knowing that they could do anything they want with your brand? And I was like, well, what about Google? Like, they're a bigger brand than you, right? And he's like, well, yeah, of course. I'm like, well, they let thousands of their users do exactly what we're talking about. Like, don't they have more to lose than you? And he was like, obviously, yes. But that didn't change his concerns and his fears, which I've heard many, many times, and which are totally understandable. But the reality is, like, it's sort of like Airbnb. In the beginning, everybody thought that people were gonna, like, if you let a stranger stay in your home, that, like, a bunch of people were gonna get killed. And it turns out, like, it doesn't really happen. Like, people are generally good, people are generally kind, and people are generally not gonna, like, ruin your brand if they're going to all the trouble of, like, wanting to be part of your community. So, but a lot of people just don't go all in on it, and as a result, the whole thing's pretty weak.
That's an amazing answer. Thank you so much. I wanted to comment on everything you said, but let's move on. You said everything that was important already. So the next question is from a friend of mine, actually, Jonathan Lee, who, by the way, was one of the leaders of Malaysia's largest startup accelerator. Amazing human. Thank you, Jonathan, for being here. Would you say that a good community would need to focus on having a strong shared interest value, having a strong shared value or interest, or having many informal and common interests where the community pick and choose what interests them? So basically, if you have one community based on one value, etc. I think you got it.
I think it just needs to be clear. Like, it needs to be like, I need to be able to, like, tell somebody what it is, So the more things you have, this is, and like you talking about the startup grind values, like, there was 10 other startup things that could have been startup grind. Like, we were way behind, like something like Startup Weekend, or there were so many other things that started before us. I think what made Startup Grind special was the values, plus the program was really simple. It's like only a fireside chat with a big speaker. And it was like an interview, and then, like, networking, and, like, positive networking. Like, that was it. And everybody could sort of wrap their hands around that. And so I think, like, trying to just do something powerful, but that's also really simple. At least for a long time, we don't only do fireside chats anymore, but it was years before we changed that rule. And now we let people do lots of different things. But in the beginning, it was really simple. It was really clear what we were about. And if you attended one Startup Grind, you sort of knew what it was about, no matter where it was and what we were doing.
Okay, thank you very much, Derek. And we have to wrap up, I know. So for everyone, we're going to stay here a little bit longer. And Jonathan is thanking you. So we have another chat coming in 30 minutes, and we'll have a little bit of a conversation between us in meanwhile. But first, thank you so much, Derek. I could keep this going.
Congratulations on the book, Hacking Communities. Everybody go buy it. Laís knows more about community than probably most of us put together who are watching this. So thank you very much.
Okay.
Excited to fully read it. And where can I get the book? If I don't have, I might have it, but if I didn't have it, where could I get it?
Thank you for doing that job. I didn't even think of it. So Amazon.com, you can find actually the link very early on hackingcommunities.com. But if you just go on Amazon and you try to find Hacking Communities, I made sure I'm the only one who dared to name me a book that. So it's gonna be the only book you'll find, I guess, with that name. Or if you can find my name as well, Laís de Oliveira.
I'm gonna go get it right now. Amazon.com.
I'm running to get it. Only today. I wanted to get those kind of promos, only today for $1.99, but I couldn't because Amazon is like, anyway. But Derek, thank you so much. I could speak to you for like 5 hours straight. Hope to see you soon in person and hanging out in San Francisco. Send a hug to Erica and the family.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being a friend.
Congratulations on getting it out. I know you spent
Thank you so much.
So excited for you to read it.
Thank you very much, Derek. Yeah. Have a good day. Bye-bye. All right. So thank you everyone for being here. If you do not know, we are moving on with this event. We have at 9 a.m. PST, which is 30 minutes from now, we're gonna have Gauthier, who's the founder and CEO of Startup Genome. And that conversation will be a little bit more towards the economics side of things, like macro conversation. We will discuss what builds great leadership in startup ecosystems, but beyond that, what other industries can learn from startup ecosystems. So if you don't know, Gauthier, as founder of Genome, is responsible for one of the largest and most relevant reports and researches about startup ecosystems in the world and what makes them successful. They release the Global Startup Ecosystem Report every year. Full disclaimer, I worked with them as community development director for 2 years, and now I'm very glad to have him, and we'll be discussing community building in an industrial level, at an industry level. So for those of you who are interested, we'll be here with JF in the same link in 30 minutes. And for those of you who feel like staying and listening to me, I'm gonna share a very, very short presentation, like 15 minutes presentation with an overview of hacking communities, because I thought that would be a great way to add value to you while we wait. I'm actually typing this in the chat. And we will, I will be opening the floor for questions in this chat. So for you who want to stay, I'll share my screen and move on to that presentation. Feel free to stay or feel free to come back in 30 minutes. And once again, thank you very much for being here. Before I go and get the presentation on, does anyone have any question that you'd like to ask me? I'll give a 5 seconds to this, 10 seconds rule, actually. I think I will not be able to properly see the chat once I'm in. So I'm gonna open the chat here. There you go. Okay. So we're moving on to the presentation. Let me just mute myself here. Okay, I have the chat open just in case. And I'll move on to the presentation. I'll share my screen with you guys and girls. And as Derek was saying, if you haven't yet, you can go find the book on Amazon. And if for some reason you really want to read it, but for any reason you can't afford it in the moment, just send me a message. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm very responsive on LinkedIn. And I would love to hear if you have any community that you want to benefit, or maybe yourself, or any community leader that you'd like to help and share the book with them. And if there is any financial block for you to do that, anyways, I'd love to talk to you and see if I can make that easier. So I will move on to share this screen, and I'll ask one of the most asked questions of 2020. Are you seeing my screen? Actually, I am seeing my screen myself because I have it open here. So I assume you also are. So moving on. presenting this. So I'll spend 20 minutes with you. Thank you, Jonathan. I'll spend 20 minutes with you and then open for short Q&A before we welcome JF Gauthier. So Hacking Communities started as a project in 2014. I had been living in Malaysia for 6 months, and I was working for the Malaysian government, an organization called MAGIC, Malaysian Global Innovation and Creativity Center, and I'm Brazilian. So to keep it short, I was in there for around 6 months. I had hosted several dinners for investors from overseas to meet startup founders in Malaysia. I was working for the government. I was working for Startup Grind. I was hosting events with 250 people in the room at my third event. And I was like, what the hell is going on? And before moving to Malaysia, I never thought there was such a thing as community building. And it was in fact in Malaysia that someone from the government, from another organization called MDEC, they called me out for lunch and said, we need more people like you, like more community builders. So how can we do that? And that question was asked to me early 2014, before I even knew exactly what a community builder was. And the more I worked on it, the more I learned that I have been working as a community builder for a very long time, since 2007. So this is when Hacking Communities was born. So I thought I'll write an article called Hacking Communities about my experience in Malaysia. But 2014 felt like it was too short. So I decided to delay it a little bit, learn a little bit more, validate what I was doing. So I continued on my way, and eventually I started and sold a company. I worked for Startup Genome. I traveled the world. I did many things, and I experienced loneliness in San Francisco, which is one of the most vibrant cities in the world. And in a nutshell, I have experienced a lot of sides of community building, of belonging and disconnect. And finally, in 2018, decided to turn that article, Hacking Communities, into a book, which is actually out now in 2020. And the angle I'm choosing to talk about hacking communities in here is towards a company. Either you are working building an organizational culture for a government, nonprofit, or private for-profit organization, or if you're growing your customers base, you need a community. Community building is not for marshmallow eaters. If you know the reference, that refers to that study done by Stanford, where they would tell a child that we'll give you one marshmallow. If you can hold on X minutes, we'll give you a second one. The children who were able to wait for the second marshmallow are said to have had better results in life, at school, in personal life, in personal achievements later on when they came back to check on them. In a nutshell, there's a lot of facets to this study I can share with you, but for now, what I want to tell you is that community building is a long-term kind of work. It's like building a relationship. It's not about transactions. So an overview of what I will share with you about in here. First is a set of guiding principles. Why hacking communities? Second, I'll share with you a practical guide, which is the best part, everyone's favorite part. And I'll go to the final words. So this exemplifies the content of the book. The book is divided in two parts, guiding principles and practical guide. Yet I need to let you know that I'll be very short here. There's a lot more that I don't share here because we don't have time. Wait, so first thing we'll talk about is that belonging matters and why. Second, we need to understand why reinventing communities is necessary because the world has changed fast, yet the way we belong here remains the same. Then we'll talk about, okay, let's get it done. Let's start building a home because I associate community building with a journey home, and I'll explain that throughout the presentation. Finally, we'll talk about let's get it done. If you're building it from scratch or if you're growing a community, we'll talk about engineering serendipity because I believe, as Derek just said, it's all about the cadence. Either you're building it for customers or for your team or for your friends. It's about the recurring interactions that make people feel like they know each other and get them to trust each other. So it's about engineering collisions. So this is me, as you can see. I won't spend much time talking about myself. You can read my profile in the author's page at Amazon. And let's get it to the core of the guiding principles to startup communities. Sorry, not to startup communities. That's where I come from, but this is about communities broadly. It could be a company community, it could be around a cause, it could be around a physical place. So we need communities because belonging is our source code. As Captain Spock would say, we need communities to live long and prosper. And that's literally like that. Communities allowed us to survive as a species, and communities are what allow us to thrive. Talking about thriving, my own personal experience of communities has been that of being an ugly duckling back in a small town in Brazil, until I started hanging out with people who I consider the swans, founders, entrepreneurs, badass people, and figuring out that I could be one of them. By breathing the air of outstanding people, I could resonate with them and identify myself as one of them. I would never have become an entrepreneur. I would never have written a book and would be hosting this session if it wasn't for the people I lived with who allowed me to thrive. So who you surround yourself with are the most important people in the world. And the real difference between humans and other animals is not in an individual but collective level. That is said by Yuval Noah Harari, who wrote the book Sapiens. What he means here is that there is a biological element to belonging. Because back when we were butt naked creatures in the wild, dwelling in caves, clawless and toothless, we would not have survived against crazy, huge beasts or harsh winters if it was not for belonging. So belonging is coded in our bodies and it's needed for survival. Yet we are living one of the most connected, yet one of the most lonely times in history to our species. Some people are calling it the epidemic, the loneliness epidemic. And I call it the Eleanor Rigby effect, referring to that song, the Beatles song from '64. So, by the way, long before COVID-19, loneliness was already an epidemic. And data shows that majority of the people who feel lonely, unlike expectations, not a majority, but great part of them, are not the elderly as we would think. Yeah, very young people, according to this Anatomy of Loneliness study carried by BBC Radio, a lot of lonely people relate that they felt lonely a lot of the time. And that has an impact in our bodies. Going back to the idea of survival, according to Susan Pinker, someone who studied blue zones and tried to identify the reason why some people would live above 100 years old in some areas in the world. So she did a study and she went to Sardinia to visit a village called Villa Grande, where people live above 100, like there was a larger proportion of centenarians in there than anywhere else in the world. And what she found is that social integration, which is not about social integration with your family, it's about knowing the baker, greeting the neighbor, knowing everyone in the city. Social integration is the most defining variable for longevity. And according to Susan Pinker, it is a biological imperative to know that we belong, because belonging feels good. When we belong, our body shoots positive messages to our brain through hormones. One of them is oxytocin. Yeah, here we are, oxytocin. But I'll tell about this later. And that allows us to live longer. That makes us healthier. The opposite is also true. When we do not belong, when we feel lonely, our bodies shoot a message of threat, because imagine you alone in the wild, naked, like naked and afraid. You would feel like you can't survive against a beast. So belonging gave you that sense of ease and safety, whereas loneliness gave you a sense of threat. I'm under threat of death. So when you're lonely, your body shoots cortisol, and that delays healing, that weakens your immune system. The opposite, though, is belonging, oxytocin. That's why it feels good when you feel at home with people. And even though the world has changed, the way we gather has changed, the need to belong is still the same. Hello there, Andrew. Thank you for being here. I'm just greeting friends who are here. So pleased to have all of you. Thank you for being here. So we are more mobile and connected than ever, but we still need to belong. And what I find contradicting is that while we are the most connected generation ever, we are also the most lonely. And especially us who are building communities and building companies in here. It is our social responsibility to build communities and better communities in a world that is lonely. And the way to think about this is that while technology has enabled us to belong anywhere, and we can connect anywhere, we can find information, or we can buy a flight ticket to anywhere. Of course, it's different during COVID-19 time. We are more digital than ever, but still, we have less boundaries than we used to have, even more now that we are remote. So what it means that we need to reinvent communities, we need to reinvent belonging. And before we reinvent belonging, we need to understand that what community building means. I just figured that I'm taking a lot of time to talk about this. I'd like to know if there's any questions, or if you guys are falling asleep, or if I can continue. Can I get just a quick thumbs up in the chat if I can move on? Okay, I'll just continue on this part. And I'd love to hear your feedback about this definition. What is community building? So I've already mentioned that in the conversation with Derek, so I'll skip this part very deeply. to make it to be called a community, you need to make sure there's 3 elements: identity, connectedness, and growth. Thank you, Per, love you. So identity, connectedness, and growth. So Per just said it's really interesting for those of you who are not seeing the chat. So identity is about people feeling like represented by you and that they represented you. Connectedness, it's about everyone being connected. It's not about advertising. It is not a monologue about you speaking. It's about everyone connected. Bevy has a very good definition of it. By the way, they call it C2C, customer to customer. So it's about adding value beyond your product through connectedness. I don't buy you just because of what you offer, but I buy you because of the other people who are also buying. And connectedness, that sense of belonging as well. So finally, growth. When people feel like represented by you, they will represent you back. And that will means organic growth, that famous kind of word of mouth thing, but taken to another level. So I like to just split the difference between what it's a cool kids club and a community. By the way, it's not a cook kids club. There's a typo here. A cook kids club might be a good thing, which is not what I mean in this case. A cool kids club, it's about what Regina George from Mean Girls would build. It's territorial, it's about fitting in, and according to Brené Brown, who wrote Daring Greatly and other amazing books, fitting in, and she talked about this concept in her latest book, Brave in the Wilderness. Fitting in is not the same as belonging. Fitting in means pretending to be something you're not. It's trying to belong at all costs, to fit in at all costs. And most of us, because belonging matters, sometimes spend a whole lifetime fitting in a job, fitting in a family. And now we have freedom to belong anywhere. So we have that opportunity to instead belong, find a place where we feel truly at home. And we'll talk about that soon. So cool kids clubs, Regina George would be fitting in, territorial, fear-driven, like if you don't do the certain thing, you're out, and micromanaging. Some communities call themselves communities, but they're based on this, and you should be super careful. The thing which is truly a community is based on true belonging, which is also defined by Brené Brown in her book, Breaking the Wilderness. It's about being welcoming, love-driven, and empowering. It's not about micromanaging, but about trusting people, which is exactly what Derek just talked about. It's about trusting people to speak on your behalf, to represent your brand. Okay, another differentiation I love to make, that's my favorite, actually, it's a traditional marketing versus community building. I love that Derek also said that community building is a new way of branding, and branding is an element of marketing, right? And I think community building is just much larger than that. And traditional marketing is about transactions and advertising and the 4 Ps: product, place, price, promotion. Whereas community building is about driving relationships, hosting conversations, and it's about the people, it's about having purpose, what Derek called also could be a passion, having principles, which is also the values you have, and participation. It's about letting people speak and trusting them to speak. So if you want to do community building versus traditional marketing, that's what it means. And that drives potentially more results over time. And even though you could have any core values around your community, I think there are 3 core community values that you must focus on. These are authenticity, humility, and abundance. Why is that? For instance, if you have a startup community, or if you have a company who is like a customer, a B2C normal company, like an e-commerce, etc., you may have an extra value, which is of excellence or a value of service, etc. Yet this does not exclude having this aha values. And I came to it after thinking a lot and researching a lot. And that's why I called it aha, because I had this aha moment and figured out that the core values are authenticity. People must feel at home, and everything that you relate to home. Like people feel like taking their shoes off. People feel like speaking up. They don't feel like they need to pretend to be something they're not to belong to your community. The second is humility, is when people, including you, feel glad to be part of. When people know that I am special and so is everyone else. I don't need to be above anyone. I'm glad to be part, glad to participate, and I recognize myself as a small part of something bigger. That makes a huge difference, especially in delegation and making sure your community grows, even when you're not in there. And finally, abundance. It's about the knowledge that the rising tide lifts all the boats. And this value is very core to every startup community. In fact, in our next conversation with JF Gauthier, we will be talking about this core value and how it has proven to have a concrete economic benefit. We'll talk about literally the economic value of abundance in development of countries and ecosystems. But for now, abundance means I feel that by sharing, I trust the system. I don't necessarily trust everyone, because many times we don't know everyone in the community, but we trust the community. We trust the system. So I trust to take a car ride with someone. I trust to lend someone money from the community. I trust to share information freely because I trust the community. There's a sense that I know that I will be given back, even if it's not directly. I know that, and that's something Brad Feld says as well. I had an interview with him earlier this year. He says it's not about giving without expecting anything back. It's about giving, but trusting the system that eventually you will grow from that system as well. So if that makes sense to you, these are the things that you need to create to be a community. And to express those core values, the next step is about storytelling. As Derek says, first thing to build a community is having a purpose. And to have a purpose, and once you have a purpose, you need to share that with people. And again, bringing back Yuval Noah Harari, I love what he says I think it's Sapiens, but if anyone knows better, please correct me. He says, humans do not use language to just describe reality as it is. They use language. They're the only animals who use language to also create and describe fictional realities. And there's the quote: as long as everybody believes in the same fiction, everybody obeys and follows the same rules, the same norms, the same values. So storytelling is about telling a story that people can relate to and letting people know that you are one of them, and letting people feel that like they are part of you. When people feel like they are part, that they belong to you, they will basically share your same values. And the power of values is an nutshell that powers drive decisions. Drive decisions, which become actions. And that those aligned actions that come from core values that everyone shares become culture, which means fewer dollars spent on marketing and micromanagement. When people already believe what you believe, you don't need to be breathing on their necks, checking on if they're washing the dishes or doing their homework. You trust that they will share, that they will take actions very similar to the ones you would prefer them to take, because you share values at a very, very core level. So telling your story, it's about telling your story as a character as well. It's about explaining yourself as a character to the world. And what makes a great character is the journey, is not the end. So many people are very focused possibly on the image of themselves as a community builder, but in fact, it is more like a journey. And it's a journey of adding value to people and in becoming yourself through that journey. And normally, we all think of home as that idealistic place. From Homer in the Odyssey to Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, home is that ideal place where we all want to be. Coming home, there's a ton of songs about coming home. I have actually built a playlist about this on Spotify. And that idealistic image of home is what I call community building. So think of you as a community builder. It could be for your startup, it could be for your cause, it could be for your for your location, your neighborhood. What you want to create when you bring people together is a sense that they are at home. They can take their shoes off. They will not be judged. They will be seen. They will be heard. They will be fed. They have a roof above their heads. They're safe. So you want to create safe spaces. And that idea of home is what you want to get to when you're telling your story. And your goal is to create yourself a character to tell that story. We have 7 minutes left. And I still have a lot of things to share with you here, which is the most interesting part of the book. But I don't want to just pass fast through this concept that I want to share with you right now. So this is called the character diamond. And it's a framework to help you building and developing a character to yourself, which I learned in a crazy, amazing school for people who are interested in marketing in a more creative approach in Austin, Texas, called the Wizard Academy. And they build this concept of the character diamond, where the north is basically what people see of you. The south is something that contradicts that north. The west is your flaw, because people don't trust characters who are perfect. You need to have something crazy, something weird, something flawed, so that people see that you're real. And the east talks about your most authentic values, the very core of you, that thing that very innerly represents you. So let's go through this. I will share with you the example of a character that has survived through time with different names, and everyone continues to love this character. I'll talk about Sherlock Holmes. And by the way, I'm sharing about Sherlock Holmes here, but think about doing this about you and about your brand and communicating that to the world. And I can share an example of how a brand did that. So the north is about what people see. And I'm sorry for the words, but what people see in Dr. House, who's the same character as Sherlock Holmes, is an arrogant bastard. He's arrogant. Like he's just not very nice to people. But the South, contradictingly, is that he really helps people out. He's a genius who saves lives. So he saves thousands of lives, and he's a genius, crazy genius. On the West side, his flaw, he is a drug addict, an alcoholic who can't deal with his own life, with his own problems. But in the East side, at his very core, he deeply cares about humanity. And the other character that relates to that is not the same, but is Tony Stark, arrogant playboy, who's actually a genius, who wants to save the world. His West is that he runs away from his own problems. He has a very shitty personal life, and he has family issues, basically unsolved, with his father, with his mother, and a lot of pain and trauma in there. But on the East side, he would give his life for the world. So these characters talk about people who we love, characters we don't know why, but they are just crazily magnetic. And you want to create yourself and or your business that kind of character. And this is basically about the first part of principles, the first part of building community through understanding why it's needed, understanding how it differentiates from traditional marketing, how it differentiates from building a cool kids club like Regina George would do. And finally, the way to start is by having a passion and sharing that purpose with the world through storytelling, by letting people know who you are and creating yourself a character. This framework is available in the book. And we have 4 minutes before our next guest comes in. So I just want to make sure that he is not in here yet. I'll stop sharing for a little bit. So yeah, we still got some time left. I will take other 3 minutes on this, and we will continue with our conversation, hosting JF Gauthier in 3 minutes. So I'll just let you know what's coming next, because we won't have time to go through this. The 4 steps to the Serendipity is actually a parody to Steve Blank's The 4 Steps to Epiphany, because I love his book. And it's about engineering interactions between people. Engineering serendipity is like collision theory for humans. It's about bringing people together. It's about engineering events, designing interactions where people can actually meet and find each other. The other part is about building collective relationships. It's how do you deepen intimacy? How do you create a sense of closeness with 100,000 people? So it's about building collective relationships and finally building closeness through a communication system that reinforces all of that. So this is about the second part of the book. What I just shared with you goes in part 1 of Hacking Communities, and part 2, which is actually the most interesting. I'm not doing this to tease you, but sorry if I am. But the fact is that we won't have time to go through this, because in 2 minutes we are starting with JF Gauthier. So I'll stop this for now. I can continue later for those of you who want to listen about part 2, but it's also in the book. Does anyone have any question? I see that we have a great people coming in. Welcome everybody who just arrived. We have been sharing a quick chat presentation while we wait for JF Gauthier, who might be arriving soon. So does anyone have any question or any comment? By the way, I would love to hear quick feedback, thumbs up, thumbs down if it's okay. If that's the point, it's okay as well. So thumbs up if everything looks good, or what do you think about this first part? Does it make sense to you? Just see some messages coming in. Thank you very much, Jonathan. That's great. Okay, I'll stop sharing now while I listen to your feedback. And I am back here. If anyone has any questions, I'd love to listen. I must say, I'm currently part of this company called On Deck. I joined their fellowship at their 6th batch. You can check at beyonddeck.com. And basically what they do is bring 200 plus founders. There's other fellowships. They are actually starting a community builders fellowship right now. I'll be sharing news about this with you guys soon. And in their founders fellowship, which is the one I joined, I'm giving their example because they are recent and because they have done everything virtually. So they basically have designed several instances of interaction between people. And through that, it's very likely that you will meet a lot of people, because when you create several instances of sharing, and etc., you just enhance the probability of successful interaction. So think of engineering serendipity as collision theory applied to people. Not every collision will be successful, but the more collisions, the more likely there will be a successful reaction. So back to the on-deck example. When you join the fellowship, there's a Slack, there is a static directory where you can see everyone who's in the fellowship and see their profile and search for keywords. There are multiple events, from social icebreakers to socials around an industry to workshops, talks, etc., etc. So, and build weekends, which are longer weekends. What I mean by that is that the only thing that builds relationships is the actual interaction, which is more likely why, and shared experiences, especially memorable experiences, which is very likely why you become good friends with people from school and work, right? Because you spend a lot of time with them, you share a lot of things with them. So what you have to do, and what OnDeck has done well, was to engineer a series of interactions where people who never met each other would find themselves in the same batch. There was, of course, a curation in there that also matters. There was relevance, preempted relevance to it. But the second thing is that we would meet each other at various circumstances, and suddenly I would see someone's face and say, like, I've seen you before. And when you get to familiarity, people just start to feel closer home and like trusting, and it's more likely that you share more knowledge, information, anything when you trust. So that's your goal. Engineering interactions through anyways, virtual means, physical, in-person means, which is basically, if you think of it, for what Startup Grind did, and likely you experienced that because you were a Startup Grind director, is that we had those monthly meetups. And in fact, I coined this term after Startup Grind, because after the fifth meetup, likely you would see some familiar faces. And people who would come recurringly would also see familiar faces, like the regulars. So these people would often see each other and start to feel like, oh, we can relate, I know this person. And the more people find familiar faces in the room, the more they feel like they belong to that place. And that's what engineering serendipity is about. And I think Startup Grind is a great example, but more recently, OnDeck and their engineering serendipity system, which is basically a massive design of interactions, which counts on a permanent forum, which is a Slack, a static directory with everyone in there, which is more like a yellow pages for people. And on top of that, a bunch of events. And while Jeff is not here, let me know if I answered to your question, Per. But while Jeff is not here, I can also add, this is, I like to think of it in a simple way. If you're building a community right now, if it's virtual, for example, you got to think of the platform, like where everyone's connected. Is there a place where everyone can find everyone at any point in time? A platform, a recurring place that they come back to, like a Slack, a Facebook group, a WhatsApp group, etc. And then you have I'm simplifying this. You have the coffee chat kind of event where people just meet to have coffee. It's like a one-on-one kind of event, like people find each other at one event and they decide to see each other again. And that's when magic happens, right? The seeing each other again is the key to community building. I want to see you again. Let's talk again. Let's continue the conversation. So you want to create that effect. And okay. Wait, JF just got a conversation. Let me just share the link with him. Anyway, so, and then you have the party kind of event, which is what I call like when you have just a bunch of people that you mix in one room and you put them together. I'm just sending the right link to you. For some reason, he said he's here, but he's not. And the other event would be like the festival. The festival is just when you bring like massiveness and a group of people, out of which some of them will be curious, some of them would be hardcore to what you're building. Anyway, so I would ask you to think, if you're building a company, that you can't have only one type of activity that brings people together. You'd have at least 3 different layers. And beyond those, you need to have a constant platform. Thank you very much. By the way, OnDeck is starting a OnDeck Community Builders Fellowship right now. And I'm very excited about it. I will be involved. I'll share more news about that with you guys soon. Hacking communities will be involved. And it would be lovely to have amazing community builders like you participating in it in any sort of way, either as a speaker as well, or we'll figure that out. So do you have another question? JF Gauthier has just sent me a message. I don't know why he said he's here, but he's not. And I'll be troubleshooting that for a minute. I'm sorry for the delay. Yes, that's all in the book, except for the on deck example because I just improvised that example. But everything's in the book and more because I couldn't share part 2. I'm waiting for JF. Actually, I might host another session to share because the most interesting part of this book is part 2. And JF is here. Hello. Hello, hello. Hello, JF.
Hello.
Comment ça va?
Well, très bien. Sorry, I got fooled by the Google Meet link again.
Oh my God. But I changed that link. Okay, my fault. My fault, guys. Vulnerability here. Let me give you an example. JF, thank you so much for being here.
Sorry so much. I should have known because last time that happened also to me.
Yeah, I'm known to put to fool people with a Google Meet link, and then I send.
The Google tricks to put automatically
Yeah.
a Google Meet on top of the Zoom link.
Yeah. So let's get this started. How are you, Jaya?
Doing great. Beautiful
Awesome.
day here in San Francisco.
I miss that place, even though, as I shared in my book, I had a crazy time in there with parts of like community and loneliness. I think that the best thing of community I got in San Francisco were actually the people who I met outside of the startup ecosystem. And you were a great element of helping me connect with people who are artists and musicians. And that's when it struck me that you are a great community builder, even beyond Startup Genome. And that's when I see people are authentic in what they do because they are who they are and they bring people together to feel at home in any situation. It's not about work only. And you have been doing that with high-level government people. And you have been bringing those people together in a context where they feel trusting in like sharing. So we'll talk about that. And I'm so grateful to have you in. Thank you for accepting this invitation.
Thank you again. And sorry for being late.
No, it's all good. We were having a nice conversation here. So since I only have 30 minutes with you, I will get this started. And we have a bunch of people here who are community builders. For instance, we have Jonathan Lee from who built one of the largest startup accelerators in Malaysia. We have Per, who's one of the greatest community builders I know in Stockholm, Sweden. We have Daniela here from Ecuador, and she's responsible for one of the largest as well accelerators, impact investors in Ecuador, Latin America. So, you know, your people. So you can speak high level so they will get it, whatever you share. And I told them we'll talk about how to build leadership for startup ecosystems and how to drive connectedness, but mostly how can other industries adapt it and what can other industries learn from startup communities. So to get started, tell me a little bit about yourself. Who are you? So that people get to know you first.
I'm a Canadian, French Canadian from the north of Quebec City. I've been working in banking, a place where there's not a real community. Went to HBS, Harvard Business School, worked in Paris, and then came in Silicon Valley in 1996, working on innovation, so really new product development, where you start working with diverse groups, and towards one goal to create a very innovative product, but across manufacturing, sales, marketing, engineering, product marketing, and the management, of course, and finance, funding your projects, all of these people working together and developing processes and shared goals and understanding each other. So it was very interesting. Did that for 5 years. Then started my own firm helping others do strategy and M&A, and finally got to be a CEO of one of my software clients. And did 5 businesses, 2 exits, a couple of miserable failures, and the last one has been Startup Genome, where we help governments do better policies for us entrepreneurs. So really what we call forming economic communities in startup ecosystem, which is industry clusters, if you will, in each city.
Can you tell me more about this? I love the concept of economic communities. And we just define community building as when people share an identity, they are connected. There's no like central organization. There's no monologue. It's everyone connected, and they grow organically. There's natural growth to it. So based on that definition, how do you define economic communities as, apparently, if I understood, startup communities fit in that concept, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of a term that we've coined and tried to attach to the startup ecosystem, is to say it's not just a community where we want to have more love, more, happiness. We're trying to create jobs and economic growth together, and we want to be happy doing it. But the central goal is really economic, so that gives us also a common thread. How do we measure our impact? How do we measure our impact together, our individual impact? How do we actually, at the end of the day, grow the number of jobs we create every year, the number of economic impact we have? So it's people who work together across a variety of organizations with different roles to together achieve that central goal. So people can contribute in very different ways, right? Just bringing people together can support the economic community. So not everybody has to have that direct impact, but it has to be coordinated towards that impact. So it's people who work together across organization, across roles to create a growing economic impact.
And according to that, there's a great book I read on this idea of what drives economic development and how connectedness can contribute to this. So Anais Saxenian in the Regional Advantage mentioned the difference between Silicon Valley and Boston regarding exactly this aspect of, in Silicon Valley, there was this culture of openness and sharing, and versus Boston. And this is why, in terms of startup ecosystem, Silicon Valley stood ahead, even though there's great developments in Boston as well in different ways in research and so on. And then came Startup Genome, this company you might know well. In 2017 and 18, you came up with the concepts of local and global connectedness. And you were able to prove that both, I will let you explain what it means, are able to drive and accelerate economic growth to one ecosystem. So can you tell me more about the value, the concrete value of connectedness? And how do you find other industries are actually struggling in implementing that kind of concept?
Yeah, it's interesting. In startup ecosystem, we talk about community, right? It's like, should we say startup community? Should we start ecosystem? Everybody knows that the strength of an industry cluster in startups is about community, it's about helping each other. It was ingrained in everybody's language, right? But Michael Porter, my professor at Harvard Business School, published in 1990 The Competitive Advantage of Nations, right? And he said connectivity was the most important. He didn't call it community, but it was relationships. And he said it's informal relationships, not just formal relationships. Really, the emphasis is on informal. It's the glue between us. So we care about each other. Is it love, friendship, right? It's really important that we care about each other. We trust each other. So it's this relationships, the foundation of a strong industry cluster. And Michael Porter was talking about traditional industries, right? Now in startup communities, clearly we think helping each other, liking each other, developing relationships is important, but nobody had measured it. How do we measure it? How does it actually, what is a symptom of this happening that we can touch and grasp and quantify? So we worked on that because we wanted to help others, 50, 70, 100 cities know, am I doing enough? Am I doing well? Are people helping each other in my city? So we actually started creating questions that we ask startups to see how do they help each other, and ended up being very simple questions that work the best. And in all of our methodology, it's always the most simplest thing that measure exactly what you want to measure. So we ask, how many hours did someone help you in the last two weeks? A founder that helps you, an investor that helped you, an expert. You're not paying them, did not invest in you, right? But they gave you a few hours or 1 hour of their time. And in the last 2 weeks, so you can remember, right? And we didn't ask you how many hours did you help somebody else, because you might exaggerate, but you tell us somebody else helped you. And then we started measuring this. We started measuring how many people can you call this week if you have a problem, and they're going to spend an hour on the phone with you to help you. So we did that at local, and we did that at on the global scene. And we realized when we put together, the index of how much people help each other across founders, investors, experts, how many relationships do they have, informal relationship with investors, experts, founders. And we started scoring startups and scoring cities with all of their startups. and started comparing this with the production of scale-ups, with the growth rate of the startups at both the startup and the ecosystem performance level. We realized that the startups that were in the top tier of helping each other, really measured through receiving help. But if you receive help, it's probably because you help, right? But at least that means in a community that helps you, that helps each other. Those that had more relationships, and we saw that those at the top tier saw their revenues grow 2.1 times faster than the other ones. So very tangible. And we saw that at the ecosystem level, the correlation between ecosystem growth and scale-up production was 53% with what we call the local connectedness index. And at a global level, so amazing results, right? Very, very clear.
Impressive.
To be able to do that. And so now we can say, you are low on local connectedness, or you're high, right? It's okay. Don't work on this too much, or you need to work on that. Your people help each other. And then we went to the global stage and started, hypothesizing that those who were connected to the nexus of knowledge, those best places where there's most knowledge, like Silicon Valley, London, New York, for instance, Singapore, would probably do better. And again, we measured what are the relations. How many people do you know in Silicon Valley you can pick up the phone and call? And this week, and again, we saw a big relationship with the ability to create global leaders, create scale-ups.
Yeah, I'm so glad that this research was made, and now we have a concrete proof when you are advising governments. Because how often do you find when talking to people in traditional industries or at government level, even though there's all this research by Michael Porter, Annalise Saxenian, Startup Genome, how hard it is for you to reinforce in practice the importance of community building? And now I want you to confess, how do you call community building when you are afraid people will think that this is fluff? And do you think they have this perception? I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people like me that are, ecosystem building experts talk about it. And everybody hear about it and say, that's interesting, right? But until you see the numbers, that is my favorite speech when I talk about this, because I walk out the stage and people say, wow, that's the most important thing I've ever heard. And I know they've heard it 100 times before, but it's the first time that I said, you're going to do better if you invest in your community. If you help others, you will do better. And everybody's like, wow, I didn't know. And, for me, it was breakthrough because I was wondering also if it was true, right? And I'm in Silicon Valley that's reputed to be strong at a community level. People help each other. There's a lot of cooperation, not much competition. And I thought, as a founder, maybe I don't need to invest in my community because the community is already strong around me.
Yeah. And
so I started a web health startup. And I'm a B2B guy, really, B2B software guy. But I had a great idea. The founder had $100 million exit. And we got Sequoia money. And, we're like, we're going to kick ass. It's going to be amazing. We're going to revolutionize web health.
You're the next big thing.
Yeah, we're going to be the next big thing. Our idea was so good. And then we started. And it was not going so well. And we tried different things, experiment, brought more people, like partner. But we didn't really connect in the community. But a year later, it's not going very well. We're running out of money. And I finally go to a web health conference. And I'm walking the floor. And then I see this hospital health guy, a hospital software guy. And I'm like, should I talk to him? No, I'm not going to talk to him. I should talk to him. No, guys. Oh, okay, I'll talk to him. So I go and I say, hey, how are you? And he's like, right away, he's like, oh, you're MediGIF. And I'm like, yeah. He's like, well, you're doing something a little bit like these other two startups over there. It's like, I'm like, yeah, kind of, but my idea is better, of course. He's like, well, I've been coming to this conference for 10 years. And I know 8 startups that did what you did. And they're not here today because they've all failed. They all died. They all went bankrupt. And I'm like, shit. So $1 million insight for me, right? If you had told me that a year later, I would have known. I would not have wasted a year of my life. And we all talk about, is it worth the connecting, right? This guy was an expert in my field. He was not a competitor. He was doing hospital software, was very far from what I was doing, but he knew something I didn't know that was very important. I was copying the error of someone else, and I didn't know, and I completely wasted my time, the money of Sequoia, all of that. And you never know when you connect with others what you're going to get. So we got a lot of blah blah that we know, but once in a while you get $1 million insight, or you get access to people who will bring you employees later, and you'll bring them employees, right, candidates, and they'll introduce you to an investor, they'll introduce you to a customer. So between founders and between also accelerators, helping each other brings you all of assets, talent, funding, all of these things, knowledge that are very important. And the sum of that is the value of the community around you. And the more we invest a little bit in, the more we all take out. And we never know how it's going to materialize, the value of this. But we always can be confident. The more we invest in our community, the more we'll take out a different way. Maybe we'll fail our startup, but we'll get a great job later, right? All of these other ways that the community can pay off for each of us.
I want to quote what you just said and just repeat it. Like, we don't know what we'll take out, but the more we invest and the more we'll take from it. It's like trusting the system itself, right? We might not know everyone, but we will trust the system itself. And it's that belief that the rising tide lifts all boats. And I think that's super present as the core of what made startup ecosystem successful. And in fact, as a fun story, the way I joined Startup Genome was because I had made friends with this woman in 2017 Ecosystem Summit who invited me to be in the panel of an ecosystem summit in New Orleans, where I met this Startup Genome people and we engaged in a conversation and we became friends. And then 6 months later, I was joining you. And I think that layer of respect and curiosity in listening to people and talking to them, sharing information and adding value from the get-go, it walks a long way. It walks a very long way. And it's one conversation at a time, right? It's the power of one single conversation. There's one thing I wanted to share with you. I want to go deeper into the actual creation of communities in especially places where you have a culture of high confidentiality, like governments. But before we go there, I love the concept of the economic value of connectedness. And I remember you have that ecosystem life cycle where the variables are startup experience and size, right? Size and value on the y-axis, and then here you have startup experience, correct?
Yeah.
And would you agree that but basically it's like the more one side grows, the more it leverages the other, correct?
Yeah.
So do you agree that like what connectedness actually does is just accelerating learning? Because if we're sharing, we just learn faster. Everyone, like you would have learned faster. So, and the funny thing, what I like about your motto, because I know you created it, is that the more you accelerate experience, it impacts the size and value of the ecosystem. And you were able to prove that, right?
Yeah, and it's really about the multiplier. So if you think about experiences that many people have done a startup, done a scale up, right? Done investment, done all of these different functions. And on average, if a lot of people know that, this is great, but there's no synergy yet, there's no multiplier. So we call local connectedness and global connectedness the multipliers. So there's 10 people who know how to do venture investing very well, but they're not in an angel group, nobody else learns, right? But if they're in an angel group, they're very connected. When they study, when they analyze a pitch, they do it around other people and they help them do it and they share the work and then they coach them. Suddenly 100 people know it. And now the startup experience, that is a measure of quantity of knowledge in one ecosystem, now grows exponentially. So the vertical axis size of the ecosystem, so as the ecosystem increases, the network density increases, you know more people in a bigger ecosystem, it's easy. Right? If there are 100 startups in your 10 million people city, it's very hard to share and connect with a lot of them, they're dispersed. So the more there's density, of course, there's more tightness of network. And what we measure on top is actually how many events did you create to create this relationship? How many places do people actually share and help each other and therefore teach each other? And so these are static. How many startups? How much startup experience? The
Mhm.
multiplier is the network. We share this knowledge. So if I have 10 contacts in London and I have 5 friends I share them with, that has X value of 5, let's say. But if I share it with 20, suddenly it's 4 times more value for the ecosystem.
Yep.
So the multiplier of my global connections or my knowledge and venture is how many people that have quality relationship that I like, I love, I want to help them. That's the multiplier. And that's where
I love that, yeah.
different access.
And that's something, as you said, that's an area where you can control. That's something that you can do something about, right? So now let's get to the doing something about it. So I've been part of Startup Genome. Full disclaimer, so I shared with you guys already. Full disclosure, I meant. Sorry, Brazilian English sometimes pops out. And I've seen you bringing people from like deputy mayor of Tokyo to high-level decision makers in UAE, to Bahrain and New York City and London, etc. So when you bring all these people in and they come in as strangers at first, how do you create a space where they feel like sharing information which is super valuable to their ecosystems? So how do you get that started? And I know that you've been doing that on a recurring basis now. I would love to hear more about that too.
Yeah, and it's creating the little safe space around them, first of all, but also first is to attract them that there's value in peer learning, and everybody knows that, right? I can learn from another great expert. It's going to be great. So that's not the challenge, but calling on that purpose, calling on that value, and then creating a cocoon, creating a safe space where you say, we're not recording, nobody can share what's discussed here. But that again requires trust that this is going to happen. But at least from us, right, we can say and show over time that we've never breached confidentiality of a startup, right? Startup Genome has a great reputation. We never breached confidentiality. We already did what we said we would do. So having a reputation for the convener is very important. You then put them in a group. There's no recording, no nothing, and then start, right? And the trust builds slowly between them, but starting to share secret and break the ice. Right? So nobody wants to talk about what's failed, and that was one of my first questions in the first members meeting. It's like, tell us one policy that failed, and everybody started laughing. Everybody's uncomfortable, and then one person speaks, and then it's like when you're with one of your friends, you say, yeah, I have a problem in my relationship. This is what's happening. You share very intimate stuff. And the other person next will probably share something too. Right? So we break the ice with this. So the people who are most comfortable sharing, who sees the most value in learning from others, probably.
I must say, yeah, before you continue, just a comment. I wanted to continue from that moment, but that's super brave. That takes a lot to just be brave to say, okay, government, admit failure here in front of everyone. So good job in doing that.
Yeah, and then everybody's learning and like hearing things they've never heard before. Singapore failed in this. You're like, wow.
Singapore.
You're like, okay, I failed too. It's okay, right? There's a group of the fuck up nights and startup fuck up nights.
Yep.
I went there. Right, sharing when I failed, and encourages everybody to say, "Oh yeah, okay, great, I failed too, and it's okay." Right? I can talk about it. It's not a big stigma. When I go on the floor, right, that really helps everyone. When others do, that helped me before. We all help each other and break the ice and start creating this process where it's okay to share, and the more we share, the more we help each other, and then it increases, and I structured it after that. One person presents, goes deeper, challenges, success, people help them, and that's how we build community between governments.
And you talked a lot of concepts that I actually share. By the way, I just wanted to share with the floor. We have another 5 minutes, and I wanted you to know you can ask questions to JF. So if you have any questions, please go ahead, and I'll be asking my last questions to him. We have another 5 minutes. It's short, but we'll try to get one question from you to him. So It resembles a lot what the way, of course, this is a common, it's almost like consensus, right? It's more like having the common sense of creating safe spaces and creating spaces where people can feel vulnerable. The question is like, how do you actually in practice get this done? Because the concept of a safe space is very abstract. And the way you've done it in like bringing people to share something and breaking the ice is very interesting, but it does require as well. And one comment that I wanted to make on this is how communication enhances intimacy. What you gave us an example of when you share something with a close friend. It's clear that the way you communicate to people communicates how we trust them. So I won't tell my social media channel that I'm getting married before telling my mom, or I won't tell everyone else the same way that maybe I broke up before telling my closest friends. Yeah. So the fact you communicate something intimate to a group, which takes a lot of courage, communicate to that group that, oh, not only I'm also allowed to be vulnerable here, but they sense the gift I'm giving them of trust. But the question is, how can that go wrong? Do you have any experiences of how to be careful about creating those safe spaces and building trust when you're dealing with people who might not be completely in? So how do you preempt that space so that you make sure that won't fail or that it won't backfire?
Well, I think it's two different questions. Like, it's not going to backfire, and also that, other people will do it. Everybody will do it. Will it fail in like really creating a movement, if you will, spread comfort and intimacy around? And that latter point, you can never be sure, and that cannot stop you, right? Not 100% of my government leaders share something important that failed. Right? Mm-hmm. I know that, and they might share something easy, like we do in interview, and they say, "Tell us one of your biggest shortcomings." I'm really perfectionist. Right? I really work too.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I'm too hard on myself.
Yeah, exactly. That's gonna happen, right?
Yeah.
But slowly, maybe you'll get 80% of them really sharing, 90%, 95%, and you can't, in the fringes, some people will never get there, and it's okay, right? As long as you have a core group that really embodies a culture, shares, learns from each other, you've achieved your goal. And this should infect the other one. It's infectious that we do that, we learn, and other people feel like they feel guilt, and they say, okay, they feel desire to share, and then suddenly they jump in.
Awesome.
The backfiring is something that, through our group, the structure of our group made it, safe, because, there was one person from Toronto, one person from France. And if there was 3 people from Toronto, maybe that person from Toronto didn't want to share what failed.
Oh,
right?
okay.
But there was only one. So there's the probability it will backfire is very, very low. And the fact that it doesn't come out publicly out of the group, then other people in Toronto never hear it. So that was, I think, the safety mechanism. And in other groups that I've done are more social, is that everybody swears, commits to each other, this stays here, right? And you can quickly do it. Like, people outside say, you talked about this or that, I know this was a topic, what did people say? And, if one person starts spreading what actually happened in a group, quickly that person's reputation is destroyed, and this person is not going to come back in this group. So this is like holding together this commitment that makes it sure that it doesn't backfire.
I think you have a lot of very practical insights that could apply to a business, to a community around the cause, or even any community. And so thank you very much for bringing those. I think it's very down to earth. And I hope everyone here can take some very concrete steps. In a nutshell, you must be very consistent. It's all about you observing and making sure that promise you gave of a safe space is kept up. And I have one question from Alexander Borvik, and I'm very sorry if I mispronounced your name. And that's going to be the last question, JF, because we have to wrap up after this. And thank you for staying a little bit over. Startup ecosystems feels like an easy place to start a community. whereas the political and government feels the direct opposite. How do you rate areas of difficulty for creating a community?
How do we score it? How do we rate it?
How do you rate? So the way I understand Alexander's question, feel free to clarify it, Alexander, if I get it wrong. It's about what are the core areas of difficulty for starting a community in government or in other industries? How do you rate the areas of difficulty in starting a community in different scenarios? Or if there's a general rating for community building, in this place it's hard, in this place it's not. So how would you rate this?
I mean, I think that the biggest difficulty in building community is first having a shared goal, right? That's clear for everyone and that everybody agrees on. And when I didn't have that in certain communities I created, in economic communities, it's easier because we have this shared purpose of job creation, economic growth, startup success. And so in areas where the shared purpose, the shared goal is not clear, this is the biggest challenge.
It's getting to a common stand. Okay.
Yeah, and the second one is that really link the achievement of that purpose with the group you're forming. What is the appeal, right? What's the value proposition of that group in achieving that goal better together, right? Mm-hmm. Against the fear of resistance, right? And in accelerators, so organizations that help startups learn and do better, they all compete with attracting the best startups. They compete with funding, they compete with in a lot of ways. So bringing them together is very difficult because they see themselves as competitors. They feel like the knowledge they have is actually their competitive advantage. So breaking this is very difficult. So then creating trust is the biggest challenge in those. It's like I go in this group, I might do better, but actually I might do worse. The value proposition is not clear to me at the beginning. How do I frame this? And then in those places, it's about starting small, right? At least let's meet each other. Let's start on something that is not challenging first, right? Telling our personal stories and how do I create relationships, care, and build slowly. But these are the two big challenges at the beginning.
Yeah, and these are I fundamentally agree with the way you went about it. It's about the harder it is, the more you have to build trust by getting people down to the simplest things that connect them and not asking them to share what's your secret recipe from the get-go. So unfortunately, we need to wrap up. Thank you so much, because this is not only extremely insightful, but also serves to show how community building, and that's similar to the conversation we had with Derek, where we talked more about customers and building a business and building a community for a business specifically. And now we're talking about that in economic development. And that serves the purpose to say, not only community building can be something positive for the world from a lens of bringing and belonging, but also for economic growth, for job generation, for very concrete, evident and clear benefits that are economical and are financial, beyond just what many of us might perceive as community, as only for activism, or it serves everything. In fact, community is broader than only one area. And you brought us that. So thank you very much. And well, I hope to see you guys doing amazing stuff soon. When is your next publication coming up?
Next publication is going to be in January or February on life sciences or AI.
Awesome.
The startup ecosystems, the best cities in those subsectors.
Amazing.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, JF. Have a very good day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right. So thank you everybody for being here. So this is a wrap up. I will share, this is recorded, so you can watch it again or share it with someone who might have missed it. The book, Hacking Communities, talks about several concepts we have seen throughout this conversation here today with Derek Andersen. In between, I shared with you part one of the book on principles, and also in the latest conversation with JF. So Hacking Communities is not focused on building startup communities, but most of my learnings and development in community building came from startup communities. Of course, also I learned a lot from various miscellaneous communities, including surfers, including pole dancers, including bakers. So it's not only about startups, but I think what startup ecosystems have done well and startup companies do well is understanding the benefit of building relationships, not transactions, and community building as a strategy rather than just traditional marketing. Of course, it varies and changes depending on the ecosystem, but I bring most of my learnings on abundance and sharing and a culture of openness from startup communities, which is why I wanted to bring this on, besides sharing the concrete value, economic and financial value of community building versus traditional marketing. And I hope you all enjoyed this a lot. You can follow me, you can find me on LinkedIn and connect on LinkedIn, Laís de Oliveira, the way it's written here in the chat. And you can go to Amazon, find Hacking Communities, and you can find the book there. It's already available. And again, if you want to offer the book to a specific community, organization, company, and if they or you have any financial issues in getting access to the book, feel free to reach out to me either via email or on LinkedIn, and we can talk about that. I'd love to make it available to as many people as possible. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Joanna. I'd like to give a shout out to the amazing Startup Guide team, by the way, who's in here. And these people were the best publishers I could have chosen in my life. I don't know if they want to do this, but I'll say that if you ever want to publish a book, I actually recommend them. And regardless of you publishing a book or not, they are one of the most amazing companies that are also mapping ecosystems with a badass network of people in many cities around the world, in more than 50 or 80 cities, if I'm not mistaken. And they're doing a great job building communities and getting the startup ecosystem of the world mapped with beautifully designed books. And mine is one of them right now. Thank you very much, Joanna, Daniela, Edley, Anna, Cecil, Hazel. Thank you so much. You're an amazing team. With that, I'll wrap this up. Thank you all for attending. And very excited to have this baby out. I hope we stay in touch. This is only the beginning. We'll continue with more events related to the launch of Hacking Communities in this week and in the next week and throughout January. Thank you all for being here. I'll see you again.